Good morning, designers. Welcome to day 3. We're going to get right into our sketchbooks today and continue our drawing exercises. So the drawings we're going to do today are going to continue on this same kind of pathway of figuring out how best to use our templates to enhance our drawings. Some of the examples that I'm going to work with you guys today with will include a couple of things that will sort of push our thinking on this, like the possibility of alternative materials. So say, for example, in here, right, it appears as though I've drawn an object that has some sort of semi-transparent material, something maybe like a plastic or a glass. So to do these drawings, you're going to find that it's probably really handy to have some models close by to work with. Just stuff that you'll dig up around the house can be really handy. If you absolutely can't find anything, I'll probably produce a few photographs here. I'll show you what I mean in a second, but think about some of these forms that we're attempting to draw: circles, spheres, cylinders, cones, and how might you arrange them in space, actually sitting in front of you, so that you have a drawing reference. The more interesting your objects are, the more fun you're going to have with these drawings. If you can't find anything, that's quite as cool as this like split piece of bamboo, right, with a ring on the top or something like that. Even something really basic like rolls of paper toweling or empty tape rolls. Arranging these in your space, creating maybe like nesting versions of them can be really handy. Let me show you how I might use them in my studio if I was going to set them up to draw. You scoot a few things out of the way, bring in a surface to rest them on, and just arrange a couple of these objects. So if I was doing this drawing, here's how I would look at it. I would be looking sort of straight across at the subject. When I photograph these objects, I'll probably even put in a little bit of a white background. If you don't have a white background, that's just sort of a stiff piece of paper. But having this object in front of me to render, rotating it, manipulating it in space, maybe including some objects like here's a piece of clear plastic tubing, just to kind of add into the scene so that it modifies the materials. I will provide a couple of photographic examples for you to work from, but I recommend that you find some of these objects around your house so that you can come up with some of your own ideas. I bet you've got much better ideas than I do. So to wrap up this tutorial, I'm going to do a couple drawings similar to what I have in the examples that were emailed to you. I'm also going to build on some of the drawings that we did yesterday and address a couple of issues that you might just want to kind of advance your drawings a little bit. So I've got all of my models handy just in case I need them, and the drawing materials that I'll need today. I think I'll probably be doing most of my drawings with my my HB or my 4B pencil, just to make sure that you guys can see. But I recommend that if you're doing your drawings in your sketchbook, inevitably you're going to do a lot of erasing. Make sure you're using your 6H pencil first. Definitely going to need your eraser handy. Here we go. Grab that guy out. I've got my 2 pens handy in case I want to do any darkening. And keep your oval templates handy. I'm also going to use my straight edge. So let's flip over to a blank page here. And my blank page has actually got a couple of drawings begun on it, because I think as I kind of work through these tutorials, I don't want to have to completely start from scratch each time. But we'll do some nesting cylinders down here. We'll do some thicknessing right here to kind of start to work with materials that, instead of being just like perfectly flat, right, they actually have a tube thickness to them. We'll kind of figure out how to do that kind of work, and then I'll work on a little bit of transparency materials with this sphere project here. Some of these types of drawings you'll be able to do, some you won't. It really depends on the sort of templates that you're working with. But let's take a look at this cylinder drawing down here. The first thing I want to do is just kind of render out a quick cylinder, and if it's handy for you to keep track, keep your eraser close by and keep lightening some of those lines. You'll notice that in this drawing of the cylinder, I have a center line that I started with. That center line is just going to be handy to keep aligning successive drawings. So in this case, I would like to render out a sort of a nesting cylinder, a cylinder within a cylinder. So keep in mind this sort of situation, right, where I've got a cylinder inside of a cylinder. How would I draw that? So the outside diameter cylinder is going to be the largest oval, and I'll just kind of scoot down to something a little bit smaller. And on these circle templates, there are a couple of little assists that are buried deep inside, right? If I want my drawings to be in perfect alignment, they have little center markings that you can use. And I'll kind of come back to those, but on these templates, they actually look like tiny little perforations. On these templates, they actually have small black lines. Whichever one you use doesn't matter to me so much. It will work just fine. Okay, so I'm going to line up a slightly smaller oval right along my center line. Go ahead and mark that one in. And then I'll come back here to the back side of my line. And looks like I'm going to fall off the page a little bit. That's okay. Now I'm going to do my drawing as a through drawing first to connect those lines. And then I'll always erase them back through. I find that sometimes it's handy to just do the drawing as if all of my materials were transparent, and then erase back through whatever I can't see or shouldn't be able to see. So right now it looks like I've got way too many lines there. I'll bring my eraser back in and lift out some of these lines, keeping in mind that the materials I'm working with now, imagine I'm working with, solid materials, cardboard materials, materials that I should not be able to see through. Something like this, once I've got my lines sort of partially erased, to make it a little bit easier for you to see in the video, I'll darken it with my Sharpie pen. Once that pen goes down, it is really hard to cover it back up, so make sure that you're pretty confident where your lines are before you start darkening. Okay, so nesting cylinders, not too bad, right? I really like this kind of experiment because it helps me kind of do this push-pull, inside-outside thing. Eventually, we'll talk today about darkening some of those interior lines. Let's jump up here to this sphere so that we can talk about the shading simultaneously. My outer sphere, or my outer circle, had a 1.5 inch diameter, so I'm going to use that same one here to render in my ellipses. And using these ellipses, I'm going to start to divide up my sphere. Okay, so you can kind of start to imagine these sort of pie slices sneaking in from the sides. It gets really complicated really fast when you start doing this, but I'm not going to erase any of my lines just yet. What I'll probably do is I'll darken them first with the pen, and then I'll erase them. That way you can sort of see how those divisions happen. And I'll add in one more here. Okay, so in that drawing, I'll bring it up a little closer to the camera so it's a little easier to see. Whew, that got very complicated very fast. What I would like to be able to do, similar to some of the examples that I emailed to you, would be that I want to expose the inner sphere and have just some like shell-like pieces. And then also some of the shells have a certain layer of transparency around the outside. Okay, so for that to happen, I need to carefully imagine, which parts of this drawing are going to be left behind and which parts will be erased, which parts reveal the inner sphere and which parts conceal the inner sphere. So I'm going to just start to carefully darken these in with pencil first. If I use a pencil first, then I can, you know, bring in the oops eraser just in case. So I'm using a slightly darker pencil now to do some of these ovals. I'm pretty confident that this one is one that I'm going to hang on to. Actually, I'm so confident, I'm just going to work that right in with a marker. I like the way that that looks. And because some of these areas I'm going to have as some transparencies, anything that is sort of hiding behind a slightly opaque material like glass or plastic will always end up being just a little bit lighter than the things that are foregrounded. So I'm not going to make that backline quite so dark, at least not yet. I may not even do the final version in pen. I'll bring in my 1.5 inch circle template to kind of render in the outer part of that shell. Okay, so I have my first sort of shell chunk that's in the side there. And let's see, now I need to choose another piece here. And yeah, I think I'll bring in this circle template to sort of help me visualize where the other chunk may come from. Sort of like this one on the outside. So while I have my circle template here, I'll use it to sort of darken in the parts of that inner circle that will be revealed right there. Bring my oval template back in. So I have my two shell pieces in place. I'll come in here and maybe add in the rest of that circle now that I know that I won't be using any more. I'll bring this guy a little bit closer to you so you can see what's happening here. So I have two outer shells and an inner sphere. If I bring my eraser in and just going to use my eraser at this point to lighten the lines, not totally blow them out, just lighten them up. Starts to sort of really reveal which pieces I've kept and which pieces I have not. Okay, so let's make that sphere some kind of like a more solid material, something like, I don't know, let's say we made it out of concrete here. We'll give it a nice concrete gray. And to do that, I'm going to turn the pencil on its side just ever so slightly and very, very lightly build up a layer of density right around the edges of where that inner sphere would be. Maybe use the side of my thumb to blend it in. Okay, so it already sort of appears as though I can see the inner sphere through this top layer, this top shell layer. But let's treat these other two layers a little bit differently. Let's give them a treatment with the Sharpie marker. And without giving this like too much of a woodpecker feel, let's just add a dot pattern to the inside here. Remember, the felt tip on this Sharpie marker will bleed as long as you just give it just a tiny bit of contact. It doesn't need to be tapped or knocked on too hard. And everywhere that this material kind of is semi-transparent or see-through, let's continue that dot pattern. Like a semi-opaque piece of glass or plastic. Think in this terms now about this piece of glass that I've got here. It's or this piece of plastic tubing. It's not entirely clear how it changes my fingers in the background, but it does slightly change them, right? It changes maybe the lightness or darkness or the clarity. And so there are ways, sort of shorthand ways we can use to reference that in our drawings. I think this dot pattern is kind of a nice way, and we'll do a bit more of a study with this later on as our drawing unit continues. Somewhat randomized with the dot pattern, trying not to get too obsessive about it. Okay, not bad. While I got this thing up close, I realized, oops, I forgot to darken in one of my lines. So I'll grab my oval template one more time. And finish this one off. And then anywhere that sphere is sort of being revealed from behind, I can darken that in just a tiny little bit. And because I should be able to see the back of this sort of shell-shaped piece here, I'm going to make a very light line where that might be revealed. Sort of back edge of where this one is. So go ahead and give that a try. Now the other thing that we'll do, the last thing we'll do in our drawing demonstration today is kind of address material thickness. Now, just about all of our objects right now have this sort of almost anti-realistic kind of paper thin material, which is fine if you're working with materials that are very, very thin. Paper toweling tube, this piece of like fence post that I cut and had sitting around the studio. It's a very thin material, but even this very thin material has thickness, has wall thickness, right? If I grab a slightly thicker cardboard tube, right, there is some heft to this thing. So how do I articulate material thickness? Well, let's use this kind of cylinder template here just to kind of quickly render that out. And to do that, I think I used my slightly wider oval templates. And again, I have my center line rendered, and I have the kind of front and back ovals laid in. I haven't done any erasing yet. Let me just double check and make sure I got my correct. Yeah, there we go. So on this template, if you remember, I talked just briefly about this one having small perforations, little holes in the template where the center lines are. And if you notice, there's a center line that runs vertically and horizontally through our ovals. We're going to need access to that. So I'm going to start with the actual diameter of my material here, and then downsize it. And I'm going to downsize it pretty radically so that it's a pretty obvious material thickness. And I'm going to carefully line up the horizontal and the vertical lines. To make sure I can get my horizontals, I have to have my center line, but to make sure I can get my verticals, I need to actually push my pencil through those small perforations at the top and the bottom. I'll just use the edge of my template to very lightly connect those two lines. So now I have sort of an X or a cross, an XY in there to be able to reference, so that now my perforations in the vertical and in the horizontal can be referenced. So I can get it all centered up. And I'll render in an oval that fits perfectly inside of the first one. And I'll just finish up this drawing briefly, or I'll just finish it up quickly with some pen to kind of describe how that material thickness looks in a finished piece. Here's the outside diameter and the inside diameter. So if I lighten some of those extra lines up here that the pencil left behind, and add just a little bit of inside shading to the tube. That is just the very beginning of how we might be able to start rendering out material thicknesses. So say, for example, this really cool chunk of bamboo I've got, the thickness of the bamboo will need to be described so that I can actually draw this gap that runs down the top.